Hey everybody, this morning I'm going to do a brief presentation screencast here on depth perception. Depth perception is basically how far away is something, and if you want to be kind of looking on in your book, this covers pages 118, 119, and a little bit of page 120. So with depth perception, we talk about a couple of different things, and one is monocular vision, and the second is binocular vision. So M-O-N-O, mono, means one. So when we're talking about monocular vision, we're talking about our vision with one eye. And binocular, B-I, nocular, bi means two. That would be our vision when we're using two eyes. So we'll go back to monocular for a moment. Monocular cues in our environment require only one eye for us to pick up on. And of course, depth perception is a key, evolutionarily speaking. Without depth perception, we would bump into things, make mistakes, and stepping off perhaps where we shouldn't, and so on. You probably can think of a time when you might have made a mistake. A student in my face-to-face class said that he used to play lacrosse, and sometimes it was very challenging to perceive the depth of the ball for him, and he would often miss it. So he had to really work on depth perception and catching the ball. So back to different monocular cues. When we're looking at paintings, they're actually called pictorial cues, but this is a really great way to pick up on and explain different monocular cues. So the painting that we have here displayed, we're going to use that for a moment to explore a few of these different monocular cues. The first one is called relative size. And basically what we're saying there is the example in this picture would be the boats. We have boats of different size. We have larger boats and smaller boats. So when we see a picture, a photo of boats, and there are varying sizes, we make the judgment that larger ones are closer to us because we imagine that most boats are about the same size. When we look at this picture, though, we can tell that some are further away and some are closer based on relative size. The second monocular cue to look at in this picture is overlap. And I like to use the buildings and the trees as an example of overlap. The trees clearly are overlapping or in front of the buildings, and so we assume, again, we make this judgment that the trees are closer to us than the buildings. Third one is aerial perspective, and that is basically that far away objects are looking kind of blurry or hazy in the atmosphere. And again, I like to use the trees. You can see the trees further away start to get blurred, and that the sky is actually kind of blurred further away. That's an example of the aerial perspective. And then there's something that's a bit similar. It's called texture gradient. And I like to use the water here to be an example of texture gradient. You can see close up that there's more distinct brush marks creating the image of the water, but then as the water goes away, it's more blurred. So texture gradient is when something has a specific texture to it and you can see that when it's close to you, but then as it's further away, it's harder for us to see the specific textures. Finally, there's linear perspective, and the canal here itself really gives us a good linear perspective, a lot like looking down the railroad tracks. This is when parallel lines begin to come closer together in the distance, and it gives us the feeling that some things are closer to us, and then as it gets further away, the lines, the parallel lines get closer together. That's further away. Here's another picture. This is a popular kind of activity, sidewalk art. You can see this fellow here is actually walking around, but I'm pretty sure this is just a painting creating the illusion that there's depth where there isn't. So these are kind of fun ones to look at. This next one is one of my favorites because I really cannot imagine stepping off the sidewalk here, being brave enough to try and see if this illusion is just an illusion. In particular, I like the relative size here. You can see Batman and Robin are pretty big, but the crowd or the police officers below are very small. So I imagine that Batman and Robin are way up the building and that the people below are a very far away in the distance. You might also notice texture gradient in that details in the walls and the windows are quite clear in the windows that are closer to us, and then the windows that are further below, those textures are more blurred. This last picture I have here actually shows kind of the opposite of what we've been talking about. This shows ambiguous cues. So there really aren't any cues for you to judge whether this horse is looking at you or away from you. And there's really no wrong answer here. You can imagine whatever you would like, but you can see there's the absence of overlap, the absence of the texture gradient, the relative size, and so on. So we really are not sure which direction the horse is looking. So briefly now we'll move on to binocular cues, or cues that are important when you are using two eyes. So first there's convergence, and if you hold a pencil out a little bit a distance in front of you and you're looking at it with two eyes, it's kind of comfortable, but then as you move it in, you can feel your eyes turning inward to watch the pencil moving closer to your nose. And it's an uncomfortable feeling, and that is being communicated to your brain and understood as something that's very close indeed, and that's called convergence. And it's one message that we get about depth perception when we're using binocular vision. Second one, another binocular distance cue is called binocular disparity, and this is based on the fact that you see two different images with your two different eyes. So because the eyes are set a couple of inches apart, when we look out into the distance, we get a slightly different view with the two different eyes, and that gives us even better depth perception. So quick demonstration, monocular versus binocular here. Featuring binocular disparity, is take your fingers, two fingers straight up, put your arms straight apart, and then you're going to bring your fingers together in front of you, but with just one eye open. So we're going to go monocular just first, and try to make the two tips of the fingers come together. Now if you're like most of my students and like me, they miss by a little bit. Some of my students get it straight on, but mostly we miss by a little bit. You try the same exercise with both eyes open, binocular vision, and you bring those fingers together, it's much more likely that they'll come exactly together. So binocular disparity is giving you a little bit of an edge with depth perception, actually a big edge, and that's the value of it. When you look on page 120, there's kind of a fun stereogram to look at. So I'll let you just use the directions in the book to take a look at the stereogram. Okay, thanks for listening.